Hello, I'm Paul Hennix. Welcome back to Money Matters. We're pleased to have Dr. Gail Parker with us today, a feature reporter with Channel 7. The love and marriage counselor for Good Afternoon Detroit, Gail also has her own radio talk show called Ask the Psychologist on WXYZ, as well as being the founder and director of the Contemporary Psychiatric Clinic in Birmingham. When we return, we'll be talking with Dr. Parker about the psychology of money, the attitudes we learn as children, and how they affect our adult lives in handling money. Stay with us. We'll be back right after these messages. We're talking to Dr. Gail Parker about the psychology of money. Gail, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's nice to have you with us today. What role does the psychology of money really play in all of our lives? Is it really that important?
It's extremely important. It is such an overwhelming role. It's almost hard to answer the question. I was shopping today, and not in preparation for the show, but I went shopping, and I began to feel some of the frustration that I think most people feel when you go shopping. Number one, you begin to feel you become aware of money. And so you're aware of what you don't have. You're aware of what you'd like to have. You start feeling guilty about spending too much. Then you start getting angry because you want to spend what you have. And so it raises conflicts in people.
So we really go through our daily lives almost literally every single moment relating to finance, and yet we don't always think about it, do we? Is that a fair statement?
I think that's a fair statement. I think that we think about money, obviously, when we're confronted with money, when it comes time to spending money, and we do spend money every day.
Children, obviously this time of year particularly, and always, is a situation where money and children, as you commented earlier, are two of the biggest problems in a marriage. How do children relate to money today? How is it affecting them in the world in which we live?
Well, it's very interesting. Teenagers are particularly concerned about money. I think most kids are, but you see it more in teenagers. For the first time, kids are confronted with the reality that they may not be able to achieve what their parents have. In the past, we always, in our generation, we certainly hoped that we would surpass our parents financially, and that was their hope.
Always thought you'd do a little bit better.
A given. Well, that's not a given anymore, and kids know that, and they understand that, and they're frightened by it. And so what we see today, particularly with teenagers, is kids who are really under a lot of stress around money. They're afraid that they won't have enough. They're afraid that they won't be able to get jobs, and so they pressure themselves, and they push themselves, and they don't have feelings of security about money, not unlike people who grew up in the Depression.
So those that I've dealt with people, and obviously chatted with people who went through the 20s, the 30s, and so forth, and they've carried that attitude literally till today. They won't do things, or they're very conservative, and really that's something you don't escape from? Is that something you learn as a child?
Yes, and it's difficult to change attitudes. And we develop our attitudes early in life, and all of us have learned about money as children. We learn about money when we see our parents handle money. It's very interesting. One of the things that happens particularly in this culture is that money is not talked about freely and openly.
Isn't really taught in
many
schools
households.
either.
It's not taught in schools. It's almost a private kind of thing. People don't divulge their salaries. I remember my mother telling me, I would say out of curiosity, how much does Daddy make? And she would say, that's none of your business. And I understand now that was because she was afraid I would tell other people. But if you think about it, people are not free about talking about money. And so it's a taboo subject, not unlike sex in many households.
Very guarded subject.
Very guarded subject. And so people are uneasy about money. They're uneasy about their feelings about money and what it means. And yet we live in a culture that forces us to deal with money all the time. So there are a lot of contradictions there.
Gail, you mentioned a very young age. At what age does a young person or a child today begin to develop those attitudes that will carry on through their adult life?
I think from the very beginning. If you watch, for example, a 2-year-old, a 2-year-old understands that, begins to understand that if he or she asks for something in a certain way, he either will get it or he won't. And so, and what that has to do with money is the following. Money gets us things in this culture. The more money you have, the more things you can acquire
material
for yourself.
Things is what it's really related to more often than anything else.
But the psychology is the following. If you are a person who feels like he doesn't deserve to have things, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You will always feel guilty about spending your money. Or you might be cheap about money. Or you might be frightened about money. And that's an attitude. And it has nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have. There are some people who have very little money who are unconcerned about money. They feel, well, there's more where that came from, or,
Sure.
you know, I'll always find a way to make some money. Now, those are attitudes that you learn early in life, and so you pick that up from your parents and the way they deal with money and their feelings about money and their anxieties about money.
Can you actually break that mold if you're brought up in a particular household where you are restrictive and very guarded to money? Can you grow up as an adult and change those attitudes?
Yes, but not without some difficulty. First of all, you have to be aware that it's your attitude about money more than the fact that you either have or don't have money that's causing a problem, if there's a problem. Once you become aware that it's your attitude, then you have to go to work on changing the attitude. What usually happens is you have to change the behavior first, and then your attitude will change. For example, I have counseled women, professional women over the years, who have certainly been able to afford anything they wanted, within reason.
So
I'm not
that
talking
really
about wealthy
wasn't an
people.
issue within reason?
Well, yeah, but these were women who always felt guilty about spending money for certain things. For example, women have problems spending money to hire someone to help them take care of their homes. These are working women. That's an attitude. That's an attitude that says, I don't deserve to be taken care of. I don't deserve to have this. And so they'll say things like, I can't afford it, which isn't true.
Sure, they could obviously
It's a matter of priorities. It's a matter of saying, you know, I am working and I need help doing my housework now, and so I will spend some money to get that help. But you have to have enough self-esteem to be able to make those kinds of choices. Before you get the self-esteem, though, sometimes you have to just force yourself to, in this case, hire someone to help you take care of your children, to help you take care of your house, and then you find out it feels good. And that good feeling reinforces that continued behavior.
Is that a role playing a little bit that I suspect that we're all subject to from our parents and prior generations? The housewife is supposed to be just that, and all of a sudden we find 50% of the workforce today are working women. Well, one shouldn't be expected to work 8 hours, whatever it may be, go home and be a full-time housewife. Is that the roles that in some cases we've been put in through our own parents and so on that really has caused those problems and not let us deal freely with hiring someone to do our housework, for example?
Well, the myth of super moms still exists. You know,
Supposed
women
to do everything
that's right.
all day long.
Yes, and women, we have learned those attitudes, and it's very difficult to let go of them, and so we continue to push ourselves to work outside of our homes and inside of our homes in the same way that we did before, and yes, that's clearly unrealistic.
Gail, these conflicts that are created within the home, particularly with children, how can a family, adults, deal with that? You mentioned earlier certain things that you either can afford or you choose not to afford or whatever. Where a child is placed into a position where they don't get something, and that creates a conflict within a family, what's the best way to deal with that as a parent?
You have to be willing to talk openly about money, for one thing. You have to examine and understand your own attitudes about money. And then within that context, I think parents need to understand that a child won't always get everything he or she wants. And so if you're not able to afford, or if you choose not to spend money on an item that a child wants, and your child is disappointed, you have an opportunity then to teach that child to deal with disappointment. You can also give your child options. A person who really feels like he deserves to have what he wants, if he doesn't have enough money to buy something, will tell his child the following. He'll say, you know, it costs $20. We don't have $20 to spend on this item. How can we get $20 together so that you can have what you want?
So it's
and
really
then together, the parent and child figure out a way to get the money to get the item. A person who doesn't feel deserving or who is punitive as far as money is concerned will do something very different. They'll say, you ask for too much, you want too much, you know I don't have the money, and the answer is no.
That's it. No discussion.
Now, you can see that you're going to have two very different people growing up in the world with very different attitudes about money.
Does that really create a resentment on the child's part, rather than sitting down and rationally talking to a child and treating them as a young adult, rather than, or a young person, I should say?
Yeah, as a human being. You're treating them with respect.
Yes.
I mean, this is a child you're dealing with, but you're treating that child with respect. Sure, it creates resentment, it creates feelings of low self-esteem. You've blamed the child for wanting something that you can't give him. It's not that child's fault. Children want things.
It's just a natural...
It's natural. You want things, I want things.
They look at television, they go, they talk to their friends, and it's just really the environment in which we live, I suspect,
That's right.
to a large degree.
And while parents need to set limits, and every family has their own rules about what they're willing to spend money on and what they're not willing to spend money on, and that's okay. And you need to express those rules. Those differ from family to family.
So you need to start out initially. This isn't something you can all of a sudden impose upon a child at 8 or 10. This is something you really need to sit down and almost start at a much younger age.
You don't even sit down and do it. What I'm suggesting is that it's an attitude that is communicated non-verbally as well as verbally. The way we spend money says an awful lot about how we feel about ourselves in this culture. And people who feel free to spend their money the way they wish are often people who feel good about themselves and who feel deserving.
Sure.
People who show off with their money and who spend it in ways that are flashy and flamboyant and sometimes irresponsible ways, who are more attached to objects than they are to people,
really
are often
people... something in reality, aren't they?
Well, what they're trying to say is that they think material comforts will make them feel good. And that's why they keep buying and buying and buying and buying and buying, and then they get depressed because one day they discover, I bought everything and I'm still depressed. Now what's the problem?
What about paying a child, Gail, to do something? Is that an attitude that's developed again at a young age? Can you get into a situation where a child then expects to be paid and literally for everything they do? Is that a good attitude to develop, or can there be some drawbacks to that?
Well, there's some controversy in the profession about whether or not children should be paid to do tasks. Again, I believe that that's a matter of personal preference. I think that it's a good way to teach a child responsibility. I think it's a good way to help a child earn money so that you're not just giving your child
they realize
money,
the value of money.
But they recognize that, yeah, if I do certain things, it's a way of earning a little extra money. I see absolutely nothing wrong with that, and I think it can be a way to give a child independence.
Forgive me, we're going to take a break just for a moment. We'll be back with Dr. Gail Parker to talk about teenage stress in just a moment. We're talking with Dr. Gail Parker. You were talking just before we took a break about paying a child to do things opposed to literally not paying them and having them develop an attitude, for example, that they have to be paid in order to do something. That's a give-and-take situation, is it not?
Well, yes, and what parents are afraid of, they're afraid that, well, if I pay my child to wash the dishes, then he's going to think that he doesn't have to wash the dishes unless he gets paid. So that they're afraid that that will happen. That usually doesn't happen at all. I mean, if a kid refuses then to do a household chore because you're not paying him enough, then there's a communication problem. And this is clearly a child who needs to be talked to very firmly, and you need to, set limits and find out what's the deal here,
Set some standards and find out exactly what is the problem.
Exactly.
You recently did a 5-part story on teenage stress. That is something I think is often overlooked. We assume that teenagers today, what problems could they possibly have? And yet in reality, I think they have more problems than we would have even in our generation or prior generations. What are some of the enormous stresses that really they're dealing with today?
Well, their problems are different, and that's what's interesting. I expected when I talked to the kids to hear them talking about how overwhelmed they were with issues around drugs and sex. And the typical things, the things that we imagine that they're struggling with. Well, they're not. I mean, some of the kids are, but for the most part, they're worried about money. Their parents, they have seen their parents lose jobs. They have seen their parents' friends lose jobs. And we're talking about kids who are affluent as well as youngsters who are poor.
Good, solid, middle class.
I'm talking about Southfield, Birmingham, West Bloomfield. These kids are worried. They're concerned about money. They're concerned to the extent that they are worried about whether or not their parents are going to be able to afford college for them, and they understand that they need to go to college to get the kinds of jobs they want, but they're worried that if they go to college, there's still no guarantee that they will get a good job, and so they're pressured. They are concerned about spending money. It costs money to go on dates. It costs money to, some of these kids have, the more affluent youngsters do have cars to maintain. All of that costs money, and they're aware of that. Kids also experience pressure from divorce, because when there is a divorce, there's less money available. And that's particularly hard on teenagers who want very much to be able to spend money, because money does equal freedom. And
so they were accustomed to a particular lifestyle, and all of a sudden things have changed.
Things have changed, and now they have to worry about money. So it's really an adult concern. Children, in an ideal world, shouldn't have to worry about money. That's a grown-up. concern. And when you have to worry about grown-up things as a child, you grow up too quickly, and it creates a stress.
It really doesn't let you be a child as long as you really need to be.
Exactly.
How do you best deal? What do you say to teenagers undergoing that you know they have enormous stress? What can you say to them so they can better deal with it?
Well, it's difficult. Again, I think that part of the problem is that parents today are a little shaken up by the money situation, because they believed in the American dream too, that, well, you know, this is the land of plenty and we will always have money. Some people have taken money for granted. And so they don't have the confidence to be able to say to these kids, don't worry.
No problem.
Well, there is a problem.
There is a problem.
But we can solve the problem. We don't have as much money as we did, but we will manage. And this is how we're going to manage. And that's the way you teach children to deal with, even young kids, to deal with having less than they had. It's always hard to step back. You know, it's always hard to, nobody likes to think of losing something that they have achieved. But it happens to us, and sometimes we lose money. And when we lose money, then we have to step back and reassess and decide whether or not we're going to try to recoup our losses or maintain a different style of living.
So money is really independence in every form it really can take.
Which is why it's so loaded. That's why it's so terrifying not to have money. Because in this culture particularly, well, in every culture, but particularly in our culture, money equals freedom and power. And not to have it means that you are less free and less powerful.
Gail, it's been said that someone, for what unfortunate reasons, might be on welfare. That the first generation feels extremely guilty. The second generation possibly feels a little less guilty if that were circumstances that happened. And the third possibly almost expects it. Is that a transition that can... I've heard that said, and I'm just simply commenting and asking you, do people really, they do want to work, they feel guilty being on welfare, and yet there are times they can't do anything about it? What do they do in a case like that? How can you help them? Or what comments do you make?
Well, you know, attitudes about welfare are so loaded. I used to work for the Department of Social Services in Michigan, and so I have, as a social welfare worker when I started my career, and so I have seen what welfare does. First of all, it is not fun to be on welfare. The people on welfare are poor. They don't have any money.
And there's really not a great deal they can do about it.
And unfortunately, particularly here, it's hard. It's hard to make money if you don't have enough money to get on the bus to go look for jobs.
Sure. So classic catch-22 problem.
Yes, and so unfortunately, that's the bad thing about welfare. Welfare, the way the system is set up, has a tendency to reinforce dependency on the system. The good news is that there are a lot of people on welfare who need to be on welfare. They can't function without it. And isn't it nice that we live in a society that's willing to provide that?
Sure.
See? So that's the kind of world I want to live in, and I'm willing to pay my dues to live in that world. And I think that nobody wants to be on welfare. People imagine that, you know, that people like being on welfare. And no, it doesn't feel good. It's humiliating. It creates, again, feelings of dependency. I think that if people, more than people relaxing, the third generation sort of relaxing and expecting welfare, what has happened is they've lost hope. They're depressed.
So just truly is almost a hopeless, endless
they don't know
journey that they just
options.
can't do anything about it.
Exactly.
It is nice that we have that opportunity to be able to do that. Women in business today, Gail, the psychology of money and the professional woman, as I mentioned earlier, over 50% of women today are in the professional workforce. How has this changed the reactive or interacting role of marriages today?
A lot. It has changed a lot. Women have power now because they have money. I believe that in part the divorce rate has increased because women have said, I don't need you financially in the way that I needed you financially before, so now I have some options. I don't have to stay with you if you're not being nice to me. Women are now demanding, women who are professional are now demanding from their men that the men support them emotionally, not financially, which is very scary for men because men have grown up to believe that, you know, in the old days the men went out the bear and the woman stayed home and cooked him. And now the woman is saying, well, I can go out and kill the bear too, and you stay home and cook him and feed the baby and, you know, and take care of me in a different kind of way. That takes time. Those changes will take a lot of time, and women are impatient and angry with men because they're not changing immediately, and men are frightened and feeling pressured because they don't know what to do quickly enough. So I think that in a relationship, in a marriage relationship, we need to be patient and kind with one another and negotiate the changes that are taking place. People use money to control one another, which is unfortunate. And I believe that...
Even if they don't realize it or really aren't in many cases even intentionally doing it, it's kind of a subtle control vehicle. And sometimes not so subtle, clearly.
But what needs to happen is the following. I think that when two people in a marriage are working, woman needs to have money of her own, he needs to have money of his own, and they need to have household money. And so separate checking accounts and a joint checking account can cut down on a lot of arguing.
Really, identity is what it comes down to? Is that a situation where freedom, independence, whatever it may be?
All about feeling independent.
There was recently a study done that, if I'm quoting this properly, and I don't recall the source off the top of my head, but that a housewife today, if equated in dollars and cents to hours, was worth something like $45,000 a year. And I think that's not appreciated. How is that? Do you feel husbands in general or spouses are beginning to recognize more of this as an importance and having more of that interreactive situation where you both have identities, you both have money and so forth? Are they being more freely involved with each other in that respect because of a recognition maybe higher today than a few years ago? I
think people who are perhaps in their 20s and maybe early 30s are
look at it differently.
Look at it differently. I think that they understand that in fact things have changed.
Things are different.
When I was talking to, it's interesting, when I was talking to the teenagers, the girls really are different. They really are different. I mean, they do say things like, well, I want to be an engineer and I want to have my own money and I want to have my own, you know, they say things that we didn't say when we were teenagers. But
Gail, forgive me again. Just for a second, we're going to take another break. We'll be back right after these messages. We're talking with Dr. Gail Parker. Gail, unfortunately, our time is up. Thank you for being with us. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
We enjoyed having you, and I hope you come back again and share some more thoughts with us. Thank you. Until next week, when we have another exciting guest, I'm Paul Hennix. Thank you for being with us today on Money Matters.
Everybody here at Channel 7 has got a great deal to be thankful for at the end of a year, so we've decided to get some of the members of our family, people you see all year round, and have them bring along their children so you can see another side of the Channel 7 folks. Please welcome to Kelly and Company, Gail Parker of Good Afternoon Detroit with son Jason, Rob Kress of Channel 7 Action News with his son Ryan, and Jim Johnson, WRAF's morning music man with new baby Alex and daughter Elizabeth.
Jason.
Oh, I know why. Is that okay? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Oh, goodness.
You gotta hang on. Maybe I should help you. Thank you. It's a little slow here, but we're proving once again it's live. Put her over here where you can't hit it. Okay. Thank you. Boy. I guess Alex is about the newest one in this crowd here, huh?
3.5 months.
3.5 months.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, do you like having a little brother? I asked you that earlier. It's boring.
He doesn't do too much yet.
I mean, he just kind of lays around and he interrupts you with your homework. Okay. Let me turn away from that particular situation.
You love your little brother.
I
love your
better
little
luck
brother.
over here, huh?
Well, no, I know Jason, so I'm not sure about that either. You're a psychologist. You're an on-the-air personality. How do you handle your job as a mother, as a parent? Do you find your I know, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. Do you bring your professionalism as a psychologist to bear on mothering?
I buy every book that every psychologist has written about how to deal with 3-year-olds. And I have something to tell everybody who's a new parent. Jim, this is for you. 2 is nothing. I mean, whoever wrote the book and said that 2-year-olds were difficult had no idea what they were talking about. 3 is...
Terrible 3s?
3 is very difficult. 3 is difficult. I guess I bring my knowledge to mothering, but mostly I hang in there and, you know, survive like the rest of us.
Ryan, how old are you now?
10.
10.
I'm turning 11 in January.
Turning 11 in January, so it's more like you're 11 years old now.
Yeah.
Really, yeah. Rob? Oh. How about when they reach double digits? Are they easier then?
I don't think so. I think they're bigger, they can punch harder, they can fight back. No, I think Ryan is... I can't really tell a difference in kids and raising kids at all ages. I think they're fun.
Has he been fun all along?
He really has. He's been a pretty good kid when he's asleep. He's... I don't think there's any problem at all.
Jim, I'm kind of playing round robin here, but I have to because as these things occur to me.
These are tricky, aren't they?
Yeah, they are kind of this many. Has having Alex around, knowing he was on the way, did it change your plans as far as Christmas was concerned?
I don't think so. We were kind of hoping it was going to happen.
Yeah.
And it kind of happened last Christmas.
Yeah.
So last Christmas was a pretty memorable one in that regard.
So you
And
had
9
12
months
months.
later, here he came. So we were kind of hoping for one for this Christmas. Little guy to stuff in the stocking under the tree. But
You're
we'll
going to
see.
hang him on a mantelpiece?
Well, why not?
When do you have Christmas in your house? Do you have the exchange of gifts on Christmas Eve?
Christmas morning.
Christmas morning.
Yeah.
Get
I'm
up.
I'm a bugger about that. I don't want to know what I'm getting. I don't want to see what I'm getting. I don't want the kids to know what they're getting or see what they're getting until the very last second, you know. Stay in your room until the coffee's made, until we wash our faces and get the bathrobes on. Stay there. Okay, now I'm ready. Come on out.
I used to always listen for the sound of the electric train. When that started running, I knew it was safe to go downstairs, and my brothers would push me out first because I was the oldest. You were raised that way then.
Exactly.
When did Santa Claus come for you? Christmas Eve?
No.
Christmas Day?
Came during the night, came down the chimney and left stuff, and I got up early in the morning. When did he come for you?
Not often.
Not often. Oh, we're going to get his poor mouth now. Here we go. Oh, no, he just left me a lump of coal and an orange.
That was it.
When did he come?
He came, it varied year to year. Some years it would be Christmas Eve he'd show up, and then...
You never knew, in other words.
just always a surprise. If we had snow on the ground, he would come Christmas Day.
I see. How about now in your house?
He alternates. He will come some years Christmas Eve, and depending upon how busy Santa is and if he can get things done in time, he might show up Christmas Eve. If not, he'll show up Christmas Day.
Jason already showed me his special gift that he got this year, which is his... What was it?
What'd you get, Jace?
Jace?
What did you bring today, huh? The walkie-talkie?
You believe this kid's got a walkie-talkie and he bends your ear on it? Now, nothing.
We should have brought the walkie-talkie.
Yeah.
You can't shut him up.
How do you celebrate the holidays? What is it?
Well,
Family-wise,
it varies as it does in Rob's family. Jason's 3, and before we had him, we did a lot of traveling, et cetera, at Christmas time. So that's changing now. We still get together with family. It's a family time, and as many of the relatives as possible get together at Christmas time. So we start, and we celebrate with friends as well. We start on Christmas Eve and usually celebrate with all of our friends, and then we have family time on Christmas Day. And
Don't
it's
you
nice.
think sometimes that if he wasn't your kid, you'd never work with him on the air again, ever?
That's right. Who talked me into doing
Mommy.
this? What, Jason?
Can I talk to the microphone?
Yes, you may talk to the microphone. What would you like to say? Why don't you tell the microphone that who called you up on the phone last night?
I want to say something.
All right.
You got something
Santa
special
Claus
you wanna
called him
say?
on the phone last night.
He's got something special.
I'm talking to the microphone.
All right, you're doing it.
Yeah. You're doing it right now, Jason. You don't have, he's...
Hi.
Terrific, Jason. Let's hear it for Jason. He said hi. There's always, and I shouldn't say always, but in most families, there's a certain tradition. It might be a little thing, it might be a big thing, a certain thing you do surrounding Christmas. Rob, you know what I'm talking about? What?
Oyster stew.
Oyster stew?
Believe it, I'm not a big oyster fan, but as long as I remember, it's been oyster stew Christmas Eve. We had to have oyster stew. This is a very hungry Christmas for years.
Well, are you still doing it?
Yeah.
Started with your folks, obviously.
Starting with Mom and Dad, and do you like oysters?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay.
What chance does he have? Of course he likes oysters.
So that's really the only real tradition that we have.
How about you, Jim?
Christmas Eve is I think, a big tradition for me. I grew up having to go to some relatives on Christmas Eve, more relatives on Christmas Day. When I got older, I said, that's it. I get one of the 2 days to myself and my family. It's either going to be Christmas Eve or it's going to be Christmas Day, and it's always worked out to be Christmas Eve. We stay home, build the fire, finish putting the stuff on the tree, maybe wrap the last few packages, maybe a couple of cocktails.